Yeah, thank you so much for being here and taking the time.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me. I know Nick hyped me a little, and I hope I can live up to the expectation.
Yeah, you want to give like a little background on yourself and kind of the Occult Rejects in your own podcast and
Sure,
maybe plug your Twitter also?
absolutely. So that is where I am the biggest kind of personality, I would say, is on Twitter X. So it's at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, which is my personal account, but the show account you can also follow at Threshold Saints, which is also for IG. And I do have a link tree. I'm not sure if it'll be updated when Alex drops this, but hopefully it will be. It will be. I'll have dealt with it by then. And you can also follow us and me, but seven or six to seven of my co-hosts from the Gray Lodge. We do have an active YouTube channel. We just launched it. It's a small venture, but we started out doing Twitter Spaces, and we actually have accumulated a big audience. So feels right. Like the time is kind of right for us to transition fully to maybe a YouTube, but maybe it'll be cross promotional between like Spaces and Twitter. And so those are something different. It's not just me doing those, but Threshold Saints really started out as basically I was like an anon on Twitter, but I was friends with a lot of occultists. And occult podcasters, because at that exact moment it was kind of hot. So I would post things about Tantra or about Buddhism, and there was a very seminal underground kind of scrub podcast, but a lot of people listened to it. Like I saw his numbers; it was big, not big, but cool in the occult way, big. And that was called Subconscious Realms with General Lee, and he invited me on. And then through that initial invitation, we recorded 11 episodes on a Kabbalah Tantra series, which we labeled the Mahavijjas. So the Mahavijjas are a grouping of 10 tantric goddesses, and I use the Nepali sort of Newari, it's less Indian and it's not quite Tibetan, but it's somewhere in between. And Nepal is physically in between those two places. So
Oh, wow.
I kind of used this idea and then compared it to the Kabbalistic tree of life. So that was like the first thing I ever did in terms of podcast world. And as I said, his show did actually quite well, even though it was a small kind of like audio only show.
Mm-hmm.
But something happened when he dropped those episodes. Even the first, which was rough. Like I was green as fuck. I'm sorry, I'm gonna swear, Alex.
Oh, you're good, man.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I was super green,
Mm-hmm.
but we kept recording it, and then he was like, "Something's happening, mate," because he's British, and he would always say that. So he was like, he would send me screenshots, and we would see the numbers, 10,000. Like it was big numbers for
Mm-hmm.
like, and so I did a whole series, like 33 hours, 11 part, yes, magic numbers. But yeah, so I did this thing. I didn't know what I was going to do after. I was like, I have to tell this story, this really interesting story that really no other occult podcaster had ever even approximated. Yes, there are episodes about the Mahavijja, there are episodes about Kabbalah, but the way I kind of narrated it and compared it, it was very different than perhaps what had come before. And still, I've never really seen anyone replicate that work exactly. And through that experience, I'm sorry, that was a long story, Alex. But it's all myth drops. Sorry, it's all like Jin lore drops. So I'm sure people may or may not appreciate it. But so basically, a lot of occult podcasters started reaching out to me from that, and I went on to do another sort of remix of that series with Nick on the Occult Rejects. That was the first time I ever worked with him. We did a 3-part, 6.5 hours. So yes, another magic number, but we did another sort of more condensed version. But I actually was on was on video, so I was able to actually show tantric art and go through it, and then we were able to compare it to Kabbalistic images. And so I would go through the densities, the colors, the ideas, especially the conceptual things, because that's what's the closest, I would say, comparatively. It's really the conceptual ideas that are similar more than the outer presentation.
Gotcha.
So to fast forward, I thought, well, I would really like to speak to some people, like Greg Kaminsky from the Occult Personality. His show's the longest running occult podcast since 2006. I used to listen to it when I was like a young mage cell, I guess, coming up in the world. And so I knew I wanted to have a conversation with him. I knew that I had other ideas, but I wasn't quite sure on where that would take me. So then I started booking and having those conversations, and I realized actually I'm good at this. I can do it. And Greg even said, like, he's a PhD in Pico della Mirandola and Christian Kabbalah. He grew up Jewish. He's good at Kabbalah anyway. He's also a tantric Buddhist. So I had a lot to live up to in terms of coming to Kabbalah, like speaking to someone like that in terms of Kabbalah and Tantra. But then I realized he actually saw me very equivalently, maybe not as like a, full on, Astrum Argentum, like, high ranking adept or something, but he saw that my knowledge set was strong enough to speak to him. So from that, I kept going, and I ended up doing a really interesting, the first podcast series on the work of the late great Tracy Twyman, which is really controversial. I get it. Mm-hmm. But I did not look at anything in her biography. I simply looked at her work and lifted ideas, metaphysical ideas, like the pink ray, like the hyperspace kingdom. There were other ones. I can't recall them all, but I did it with two other, both named Zach. So two other co-hosts, both named Zach. So we did this 5-part series. It was the first. No one had touched her work before that. She had been sort of undergrounded. Like, it was only spoken of in like whispers at this point. And so I said, well, why don't we not talk about any of the parapolitical things? Not because it's not necessarily real, but I just think it's not as interesting as maybe her metafictional work, where she would mix, and parafictional as well, but she would mix real events, magical, Kabbalistic ideas into her books. And I could start to see it. But it took me a little while. It wasn't like I was, some great perceiver in the world. It was the exposure, and then through conversation. This is something I take from Tantra, is that through dialogues, just like the one we're having right now, through discourses, all Tantra is written in this way, through discourse. Mm-hmm. But magic really arises in both synthesis and dialogue or discourse, specifically discourse. So through that, you can sort of understand that there is a kind of magical dialectic, or a way to sort of perceive the secret third thing beneath someone's words, beneath sort of the outer density, you could call it language. In Tantra, we call this twilight language. It's not controversial, really, that it exists. It exists at maybe sometimes some people say 9 layers, some people say 7 layers, some people say 5 layers. It just depends on your system. Mm-hmm. So even saying that, I didn't quite understand that how flexible I could be ideologically, and using different frameworks, using different sort of ideas, because I'm not a parapolitics person. And both of the boys knew that when they brought me the thing. I hadn't really heard of her. I mean, I knew people who knew her. I'm friends with Dan from End of Days Radio. I've also had him on my show. He's an OG podcaster. He interviewed Michael Aquino. He's interviewed Art Bell. Very good friends with Tracy. But I didn't really know where my work and her work intersected. So anyways, we did this long form series. It was very tumultuous, but incredible too, because I learned a lot. I learned a lot that I could actually look at. I was always able to look at fiction to a degree, specifically animation, anime, and films, and sort of piece out or parse out maybe Kabbalistic, Sephirotic, or Tantric ideas, or maybe just magical ideas broadly. But through doing that series on Twyman, I began to be able to sort of see it more, perhaps in reality, you could say, but I'm not saying it in like a self-aggrandizing or like I'm special. No, it's not like that. I just meant that I was able to sort of interpret those ideas that are both, Nick Land talks about this a lot, like chronopoiesis and hyperstition and the stories that we tell and the narrative sort of containers that we put in things. Like, what story do we believe in? And what happens when we maybe, to bring up like a Peter Carroll reference, what happens if we turn that story around? We invert it, but maybe we don't get stuck on the inversion either. Maybe we can sort of break it apart instead of saying conceptually this is good or this is evil, because we're not doing anything. We're not like, no one is taking it as like a worldly practice. We're just actually going to look at it intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking at other things with that same framework that I had applied to Twyman. And during this time, I had also started like a sort of a side project, which does actually intersect with both of these two things. So I started a project called the Grey Lodge, but it wasn't just me. It was other people who were interested in magic and other people who were not interested perhaps in the way magic has generally been presented. Because I think that a lot of Western magicians and a lot of Western magical societies actually have failed to present a kind of system that is that has as much potential perhaps as some of the institutional religions, because magic in and of itself is not really a replacement for religion, but there's magic in religion. It's sort of
Oh, yeah.
inseparable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm sure you know this, Alex. And so, but they have not really presented a alternative, a viable alternative. And it's not like I think I did or want to, I don't want to. But I had this crazy idea and I had it for a long time. But when I was recording that original Tantra series, I had a kind of secret while I was recording it, which was I was having Sephirotic experiences while I was recording it.
What is
Within,
that exactly? Sorry.
so I was having, I was, so I basically, so Nick talks a lot about this and
Mm-hmm.
even discussed it crossing the abyss. So sometimes when you describe Kabbalistic or tantric experiences out loud, like we're doing right now, although I'm not using the specificity of those episodes,
Mm-hmm.
you are path working in one way of thinking. You are making the paths between the spheres on the tree. That's one way to describe it. And then through those experiences, you're able to sort of reinterpret how you've gotten to that Sephira or how you've gotten to that sort of understanding or inner density.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're able to relay it and also empathize with other magicians who've had that same experience when you can recognize certain things that they say that then you know you've experienced. And then also you relate it to the text. So it's all those, it's that's right. It's the dialectic. It's always that. It's always the three things together and like working together. It's not just unverified personal gnosis, which is a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just strictly text-based, sort of like rigid dogma. And it's not every man is an island. No, we're actually a lot more, even though I spoke about this with Toby Chappell and obviously my co-host Solar Exile on that episode, but the magician has like a natural inclination to be a lone wolf. I think this is true for most.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to reconcile that because magic is all about reconciling polarities. So you kind of go through these experiences that you describe recorded, because recording is a kind of magic. It's a kind of trapping space into the aether wave, as I often call it this. And so but you're also having magical experiences as you're describing maybe more intellectual things. So then when you go re-listen to those recordings, you'll actually start to recognize that, oh, I actually know what I was seeing. I know what I was, referring to. I actually had experiences, physical, perhaps experiences, while you were talking about something perhaps different, but related. So it was an incredible learning curve to sort of realize that, wow, podcasting is also a theurgic process in many ways, or at least it's magical and it has potential, just as technology is very magical and has potential.
Mm-hmm.
It depends how we use it.
Yeah.
So I just feel like I came from this place of sort of naivete, of sort of wanting to present, because I was not on social media. I was not a huge, I listened to podcasts, but it was very different sort
Mhm.
of, it would be like Rune Soup, or it would be like Greg K, or one of those, or it would be, more like culture and art stuff. Would not really be parapolitical or even that occult. Like occult in the occult, general occult world, excuse me,
Mhm.
but not necessarily about magic per se.
Yeah.
But then I realized, like, wow, what if you start to marry the bringing on other magicians, saying that you're both magicians, saying, cutting all the bullshit and saying, this is actually a magical process. We're going to dialogue for an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we're going to see maybe through discursive fire if like a seed or the word, I know this is really meta, but if a seed or the word kind of can arise from that. So then I realized, like, that's what I started needing to do with my show. And then Grey Lodge sort of filled that niche for me. And then having all these other, well, they're all dudes, but it's not limited to that. Like, I was always open to having other people on the roundtable,
Mhm.
but that's how it came about, very organically. And then we started having these kind of speculative Gnostic conversations. And that's what I call it, speculative Gnosticism, because I'm strictly a Buddhist. Like, I really am. I practice Dharma. I believe in Dharma. I'm strictly a Buddhist. Like, I'm nothing else. But I am also a magician. So, but Tantra is very much about sorcery. Like, it just is. But it's we treat it much more conceptually. So through that, I was able to sort of reinterpret these speculative ideas. So we then did this long form series called Aeon of the Daughter, which I know I kind of meandered explaining what that was, but it's an idea. It's an actually real idea from Tantra of the way the cycles turn. It's not super dissimilar from Gurdjieff, who I was not even aware of, but there was actually someone really interesting. There was actually a mid-century Telemite named Frater Achad from Vancouver. I was also not born in Vancouver, but I grew up as a little kid in Vancouver. So it's very crazy to me that like there was these weird parallels, because I didn't know anything about him, Alex. Like, I
Mhm.
had Googled him once trying to find Aeon of the Daughter thing, because I had this sort of, we'll say I had like this name. I'm really good at names. If you look at my episode, I'm just giving myself props, but if you look at my episode titles, my names are pretty good. So, I had this name, Aeon of the Daughter. And I was like, where did this come from? Like, this is not really, I'm not like a really theological kind of person. Like, I'm not a, I'm not a, I'm Buddhist. So we can think of things again more conceptually. I'm not married to like any kind of like deities ideas or anything like that. But I was like, Aeon of the Daughter, that's really interesting. So he basically wrote about this in the 50s. He wrote a book called Crossing the Abyss and the Aeon of the Daughter. And I was like, this is really interesting. I saw the cover of his book, and then I never read any further. And then I presented this kind of audio Gnostic gospel with these other people. They're not really other people, they're my other co hosts. We're actually very close friends as well. But, anyways,
Cool.
so we did this. But I kind of let it, especially at first. I was like, I generated this idea. I was like, I have to see it through. It was kind of, I don't know, it was something in me. I was like, I have to just express it.
Mhm.
And someone later told me, one of my co-hosts, I'm not going to say which one, but he was like, I don't know if he was teasing me or not, but he said like something about how I felt like I had to speak the key words of the Aeon into sort of existence. And I realized, like, I probably actually did feel like that at the time, but I would have never admitted it, and I would have never said it to him, like, to his face, like, you're right. Cause I'm not like that. I call myself the aloof king, as a joke, totally as a joke. I'm really not egoic, but I just, you have to sort of maintain, like, you understand.
Mhm.
You have all these people, all these personalities, and you kind of have to maintain sort of like equilibrium within all of them. So I just kind of, that's how I do it. It's not a
Mhm.
perfect way, but it's the my way, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's basically Aeon of the Daughters, that I was like, this is the way that we're going to look at this archetype. who I said was the daughter, who I pulled from Gnostic literature. There is actually a daughter figure. Her name is Nuria. She comes from the epinoia of Nuria. So this is also relating back to Tracy Twyman. This is why I kind of asked you if I could give this little background, because they all kind of weave together. So
Yeah.
Tracy was really interested in this idea of the Ophites and the Templars and the Barbawites, and sort of like this nexus of neo-Gnostic and like later Gnostic ideas. Or not later, neo-Gnostic is in the Gnostics are as they exist right now. People who call themselves Gnostic, they're not really Gnostic as in a historical Gnostic. They're neo-Gnostic. But she was also interested in these sort of historical neo-Gnostics, like the Cathars, who aren't technically Gnostic, as in they didn't exist in the Levantine in like the first and second century. They existed in southern France in like the 11th century. So I thought, well, why don't we go back and look at these Gnostic texts? And then obviously you start to read them. And I realized I had already read them. I'd read them many times in my 20s, but that was more like passing interest or like for university or for one of those things. It was never, I never really, I was like, yeah, it's cool, but I never felt anything from it. I don't know. Maybe that's a very magical way to think, like, oh, you have to feel the vibe of something
Mm-hmm.
before you can really embrace it. But I think as I've gotten older and matured a little, I can now reappraise those things. So basically, we reappraised them. And I said, actually, in my experience of doing Tantra, I actually think I can approach them in a totally different way, in a way that no one else, I think, has ever done, which is non dual, middle pillar, kind of looking for those tantric seeds or like just primordial seeds, maybe. And so, but with the goal to sort of look at this specific archetype of Nuria. So once you understand the kind of cosmology around her, you realize that she's actually not the only Aeon. There's actually three of them in the grouping. If you accept that cosmology is true, which is another of my strengths, I don't need to accept a cosmology as true or false to be able to think it's interesting or to even believe that it could be at least relatively true. Because all things in our minds are obviously relatively true. They're not primordially true. Just passing thoughts, that's not right. That's not relative. That's just relative truth. That's not primordial truth. So I have that kind of, it's not a power. It's not special. Anyone can do it. Just practice, do a lot of, mantra recitation on a rosary for a long time, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But so basically that was it. And then then I live read Liber 49 and the invocation to Babylon. Cause I was like, if we're going to do this, we're going to go full edge. We're going to go, razor.
Yeah.
You have to do it. So I began to realize that we actually have and I think I realized it since the beginning, since the initial kind of Tantra. That was my secret, is kind of, I realized that there was this story of the Aeon of the Daughter. They didn't call it that.
Mm-hmm.
They call it something a little different, but it's not using that phrase, excuse me. It makes sense for people who are practicing Sri Vijaya Tantra or Kala Chakra or Telema, or neo-Gnosticism. So it was again, I was clever in my use of the name because it actually related to multiple people and multiple mythologies and cosmologies. So I kind of believed it, but I presented it speculatively. I said, you don't have to believe it. This is just ideas. And then we ended up talking about like meta history, meta magic, and then it sort of evolved. It kept evolving very, very quickly. And we would start to see like huge numbers on these spaces. And we started to become coherent as a group and very like interested. We're all very different. We all have different interests, but we all speak certain languages the same, which is Kabbalah is number one. Obviously, I bring Tantra, and this is another thing. I had to learn how to translate my tantric experiences into Kabbalistic ones, at least in words. But through doing that, as I said, you begin to have separate, you begin to, maybe you're not having magical experiences, but you're starting to see that there's actually a deep relationship between those two things. So I taught myself that basically so I could teach them. I didn't teach them all Kabbalah, but I kind of did in a way. Is that I would really press it hard. I would do it in a different way. I would say you need to understand how the spheres work together. They're paths of light. You don't get stuck. You have to approach it from the middle. You have to approach it in synthesis and rectification with like I call it the bodhicitta or loving kindness framework. I said even on the left hand path that can take you all the way through. So I was like, you really have to sort of like get yourself together because that's what the middle pillar is. And I think that's what a lot of people get really freaked out about
Mhm.
talking about it. They think it's like centrism or like normie bullshit. It's not any of that stuff. It is really taking account of who you are, especially for men. I think this is an important lesson. And I think this is why my co-hosts all came up like are all men now, because I would push this idea like it's about knowing yourself. We obviously have tons of women that come to the group,
Mhm.
but I think this resonated. I think it just hit right at that exact moment. And it was about how to take account of yourself, how to take account of like your past transgressions and know that you're not perfect, but know sort of maybe metaphysical ideas and tools of how to rectify it. And also say like you're not crazy for having spiritual or Sephardic or Kabbalistic or Tantric or non dual experiences in this world. And I think they all needed also to hear that. And while I was doing this, I was madly podcasting much of the time with Nick, Mr. 33, as I called him for his episode on my show. Um, but I often call him Mr. 93, obviously as a nod to Beast because it's funny and he was in the OTO. Um, but so I was doing this at the same time. And so I was having a lot of very interesting discussions all the time. So everything began to blur, everything began to be speculative. And I realized that this is actually a really interesting way to look at magic. And I'm not the first to be able to do it. Obviously, I always credit Don Webb simply because he really was the one that I remember doing it first. But I didn't realize that he was sort of the one that I took that ideas from. I thought I was more of a chaos magician, like more not as a chaos magician, but I thought more of my inclination was to that material, Peter Carroll and the Discordian Bible and all of that. I thought that was more, fun, monkeyish.
Mhm.
People who know me will be like, yeah, that's completely him. Very, I have that tuning complex, that like middle school complex. I love I love word games. I love all that.
Mhm.
So, but I think really my thing was about frameworks and how to sort of look at them and not be married to them
Yeah.
and not be dogmatic and say, and this is something I've actually gotten to many arguments with other occult podcasters about when I would say, there's actually a deep metaphysics in Christianity, and you're extremely foolish if you're saying that there's not, a number one, but also to ignore it and also to denigrate it. Because I also think, and Nick and I have discussed this, Kabbalah might be actually the sort of background system behind all the other systems, kind of the background, the running background of reality. And by Kabbalah, I don't necessarily even mean Jewish Kabbalah, but yes, they
Mhm.
did do a really good job at preserving and also understanding and innovating in their own way. But I'm not necessarily talking about them as the originators. I don't even think that. But I do think that the medieval Kabbalists, like I often cite Ramek, who's Rabbi Cordovero, I think he did a very good job of sort of articulating it in a really interesting way. And he put God number one. Now, I said I don't necessarily have like a deity as
Mhm.
we don't have a deity that we sort of take refuge in Tibetan Buddhism in the way that other people would understand, but we're okay that they can exist. There's no
Mhm.
problem for us, but we're not going to worship them necessarily, right? Not
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's different. But for
Mhm.
me, especially, I take a very anti supernaturalist, anti sort of theistic approach, not because I'm an anti theistic person. As I said, I like Christian Kabbalah.
Mhm.
Always cite that Greg K episode and his work on Pico della Mirandola because it did play a big influence on me, sort of understanding this other character. And then to go back to the Aeon of the Daughter, those three other characters are Zoe and Seth. So who is Seth? Seth is not it's not related to the temple of Seth, actually. That's a reinterpretation. I'm not saying that that's wrong or anything like that, but it is a reinterpretation of the Gnostic character. And the Gnostic character is actually like the Son of Man. He's actually very Christ-like. He's actually a hero who is able to conquer the multiple worlds, as all the systems sort of posit. Book of Enoch. I did a series. I know you had Robbie on the show.
Oh, cool.
Shout
Yeah.
out to him.
Yeah, I love
And so,
Robbie.
yeah, I love Robbie too. That's actually one of the reasons I tell him this every time. I said I started podcasting. One of the reasons was listening to your Osiris and Isis series and hearing the similarities
Yeah.
between Tara and Shiva. Obviously, I've had him on my show 4 times. We did a long form series. I've worked with him many times with Nick on Nick's show, and including doing series, but also just as a panelist together. So he's been a presence in my podcast, quote unquote, career for the whole time. So I really appreciate him, and I think he's a great storyteller. I'm not quite on par with that. I obviously bring my own so maybe slightly manic style at times, but I think I do bring my own thing. But am clearly and very vocally influenced by him, and I will 100% rep that.
He's a cool ass dude.
What's interesting about Robbie is he indulges me in doing the comparative mythology, which is really what I love.
Hmm.
Like I love doing the other stuff, and I'll have conversations about many things and have. But I love doing comparative and meta mythologies. That's like if you want to make me really happy for 2 hours, that's what you're going to let me do. So that's sort of what the Grey Lodge became. It was like this place where it was not a break from my show, but it was a place where I could totally be wild. Like I could say speculatively, of course, and I would always say that, like, these are just some ideas. Maybe we're in this fourth, fifth turning sort of cycle. Maybe Kali Yuga is actually over. And at that time, especially on Twitter, and I'm not trying to be like a Twitter discourse person, but because I know that a lot of the podcasters are like that. But it was interesting because a lot of people were talking about Kali Yuga and how degraded the world was. And I agree with that, because in Tantra, we believe that the world is a carnal ground, but we also believe it's a garden. We also believe that you are agential and you can rectify everything from not only the past life, but even for this life. So, it's a huge responsibility, obviously. Tantra is all about Buddhism in general is about practice. If you are not, you can be the best book Buddhist ever in the whole world. If you're not sitting down and doing something, everybody has, every yana, every school has their different things. For me, we tend to emphasize very rajasic or active practices like mantra recitation, like pujas, like all of that. So that's all part of your life. If that's not part of your life, you're not really Buddhist. I'm not saying you have to do pujas and all that stuff, but if you're not actively meditating and reading scripture, no, it's not it for us. Now, saying that, I do think that you can say that there's a problem maybe with how Christianity is also practiced in America, you could say, because American Christianity is quite unlike the rest. It's a little weirder. It's much more metaphysical. It's much more influenced by the M's, the Mormons, Book of Enoch. Like we all know. I mean,
Yeah.
you can go look at all the big podcasters on IG that I was talking about, Enoch 3, and that's totally fine.
Hmm.
No problem. It's a very magical book and it relates a lot to like a lot of the Central Asian ideas. It's not necessarily one to one. And you can see that there are differences, just like, there are cultural differences between disparate societies. That's normal.
Hmm.
But you can see they're talking about something similar, maybe even the same, but maybe their view isn't the same. Or maybe the people writing it down remembered it differently. So another one it wasn't really my idea, but it's something that we often discuss and I often discuss on my show, is that a lot of parapolitics, a lot of these mythologies, they're actually just magical experiences codified in a way that preserves their multiple layers of meaning.
Yeah.
So a lot of what people do when they see like Book of Enoch 3 is or the Hebrew book, is they will say, this is what it means. But in Tantra, the outer meaning is never what it means.
Yeah.
It's always an allegory for something else. And usually that's conceptual, meaning in your own mind. Meaning that, yes, it's much more relating to like some kind of internal process of consciousness or process of magical experience or a clear light body or whatever, whatever the kids call it these days. But basically that's, I think I think that that's more true than not. I'm not saying that's my overall reality thesis, but I do think that actually wisdom science is the fourth and fifth turning. So I'm not really a Gurdjieff person where I think it's the fourth turning. I actually think we're in an axial age. This is a really interesting idea that actually the wheel's always turning, that we're always kind of moving. And maybe we should be in flux. Maybe we should be more present and more aware. This is obviously very dharmic as well, right? Like this is the metaphor that this has become a joke on Twitter. Maybe by the time you drop this episode, it will be passe by now and everyone will be like, oh, that's cringe. They'll say that they tell me if I do something overly, they'll be like, that's cringe. Okay. But so basically I say quicksilver surfers. I say you want to say there's an Aeonic keyword, that's it. It's flux. We just have to surf with the waves. Try and remember that everything is emptiness. Emptiness isn't nothingness. It's luminousness and masslessness. And it's all held together by the very complicated and yet very easy principle of love. And also will. I'm not a will neglector, as they say, because the will is really important. And this is the other big problem, is that a lot of the really interesting, and yes, there are many interesting left-hand path texts, because you don't have to, it's just about frameworks. It's about ideas. It's not about practices. It's just about looking at their conceptual way that they view reality. They overly, in my opinion, because I practice Dharma, they overly emphasize the will. But I think there's actually a resolution. And I told that story in the Aeon of the Daughter. And I said that there's actually, it's not in opposition to the sun. It's not like a longhouse culture. It's not, it's not like the women in charge. It's not anything that has really come before. And then, yeah, I said she's a rectification and a resolution of the sun. Because, there's different ways you can understand Jesus in the Christian Kabbalah. Some Christian Kabbalah says that he falls down into hell and acts like a cork. Some say he reaches apotheosis. If you want to call it reaching death, you could say that. There's different ways. Just even within Catholicism, there are different Rosicrucian ideas of even what happens, of even how to Kabbalistically explain his kind of, they have different ways to even explain his divinity. Is it divinity? This is obviously why the church schism. Why am I saying all this? I just want to emphasize the importance that the Aeons actually are, in my opinion, again, speculatively, reoccurrent characters that we can find. And they actually do change. Because one thing I did come up with was a lot of people on the left-hand path, they have a very specific kind of Barbello goddess. They're very Barbawhite in their sort of orientation. If you don't know what that is, Barbawhites believe in the primordial grandmother goddess. It's really interesting because in Tantra, we do have her. She exists very much, and she is very much the Barbello and the Barbawhite. But again, it's just a conceptual state of consciousness. It's not a goddess. It's emptiness. What does that mean? Of course, she can appear ferocious. We also live on the carnal ground, right? Mm-hmm. She doesn't like the story in Tantra is that she eats corpses. So they're basically falling into hell, these bodies, and she picks them up and she eats them. But it's not really like that. I know this is like really crazy, but it really doesn't mean that. Mm-hmm. She's using the idea is that she's single pointed, meaning that she's using her kind of ferocious face to kind of pierce the ignorance of what death and reality really are. Death and reality are really states of consciousness. So if you're a corpse and your spirit can't leave your body, isn't it a great mercy? This is very tantric logic. I know people might not like it, but this is very tantric logic.
Mhm.
She helps destroy the physical thing that you're held onto, but it's not about like going and sacrificing people or feeding people to that. I know people have done that, but as Buddhists, we don't do that. We just take it as a conceptual idea. So that is what I came up against, was that a lot of people really do believe in that goddess, and I really do believe in that goddess too, but it's different for me. I realize this too. And I saw that I was going to have to really distinguish between this Yadhe Vaphe formulation. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this, at least in passing, Alex,
Mhm.
but it's a four kind of systemization of the magic square. So it's a king, a queen, a prince, and a daughter. And they're each assigned an element, a direction, and an archetype. So basically, as I said, I looked at this daughter, but she's also representing the fifth turning. So I said she's part of the four, but she's not really, because people will be like, "What are you talking about? A daughter?" There's usually like a whore. There's usually a maiden. It's usually a mother archetype. That's how most people, most even mythologists, they would describe it as a mother archetype. So I realized quickly I was going to have to distinguish them, just like a lot of Christians have had to very precisely distinguish Christ from God, but also reconcile the paradoxes that arise in doing that. A lot of Kabbalah, people totally misunderstand what Kabbalah is. Very simply, Kabbalah is a sort of theological logic game that you not play because it's very serious, but it is intellectual. And so you have to reconcile a good Kabbalist. Not everyone's a good Kabbalist, but I'm pretty good. So you have to reconcile the paradoxes, intellectual paradoxes that arise in these kinds of ideas. So to separate the son from God, what does that mean? What does that place him? And then again, to relate it to the idea of aeons or yugas or cycles, where does that place us? Because in Buddhism, this is the secret. We are always the secret fifth thing. We are always the witness to the wheel. We are always the witness to creation, destruction, dissolution, all those things. Basically, that's it. I basically I was a crazy vehicle for all of these competing but interrelated ideas that were all happening in the last 2 years that I was a big part of, but not the sole force. I'm the sole force on my own show with guests, obviously, like you are, Alex. But in the spaces, it's gonzo, it's wild, and it's like everyone's different perspective. But we come together and we always say it's like in synthesis, we come together in consent. And so we started saying like the spaces are actually magic. The space, I teasingly name them sometimes when we're not doing a named series. Now, sometimes we will do a named series. We did an Aether Punk series where we reimagined a kind of synthesis between cyberpunk and solar punk. So we said, what if the world isn't a dystopia like cyberpunk? And what if it's not like this kind of corporate dystopia? Because solar punk relies a lot on these ideas of sort of large scale energy generation. In a way, it's kind of, we called it the Singapore model of speculative, sort of hyphenated punk kind of ideas.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's wrong. We were saying like it's interesting. So let's see, like, let's work with it. Let's take these cyberpunk and these solar punk ideas, but say, okay, technology is magic. What is the future society? So we would do these kinds of like crazy gonzo thought exercises. And I realized that it is, though they're also magic. So I also call them Friday Night Gnostic Mass. We also do that. They're not magic. Like we don't, it's not like I don't summon demons. It's not anything to do with that. It's simply that we say we are on, well, we record them on X, but we are obviously moving to YouTube. But we say we're on an app called X. The X in tarot and Kabbalah is both the 10 and the 11. So just like a Kabbalistic tree, right? 10 with the 11th sphere being in and out, sort of a secret sphere that's there and not there. I don't know. It's interesting, and obviously the idea, as I said it right when we started, like what is recording? Recording is sort of capturing the magic of space in time through the aether wave, through the recording itself.
I'm gonna have to check some of those out for sure. What kind of got you started initially into all of this? Were you raised religious at all, or?
So I've been a Buddhist pretty much my whole life.
Hmm.
And I've everybody who knows me knows this story because I've told it many times, but I'll quickly retell it. Is that I'm Eurasian, my dad's
Okay.
Asian, so I grew up around magic and sort of Southeast Asian occultism my entire life,
Oh, cool.
and so basically, but also Buddhist, also Buddhism,
Hmm.
but not necessarily the kind of Buddhism, like not a serious Buddhism. It's more of a cultural Buddhism, you could say. So that's basically my story. But I did grow up Catholic actually, and
Gotcha.
so I'm a my mom's French Canadian, so that's a big part of my sort of understanding of the world as well is through
Yeah.
Catholicism. I've recorded with Teresa from Occult Rejects and the Spiritual Gangsters on. She let me kind of humored me into doing a Mary episode because I it's not that I'm obsessed with goddesses or anything. Like people will be like, oh, he's like just another I'm not. I'm really not. In Buddhism, we always say that all paradoxes resolved in the consort. So, as I said, there's a lot of, male magicians are very interested in like these Lovecraftian deities and like the Norse deities, especially right
Hmm.
now. It's very hot in contemporary magic. So
Hmm.
I think that these actually, to look at them non-dually, which is how dakinis or these goddesses are described, like they embody exactly who they are. They're non-dual, they're empty, and they're essentially enlightened, as we would describe them. Not all dakinis are enlightened, but the ones that we would acknowledge are in general. And so it's kind of an interesting. I like the contrasts. I like to be on, I guess, against the grain in some ways. I
Hmm.
like to sort of advance this other frontier of what I think is cool rather than talk about what I think other people are talking about. Now, whether people are interested in necessarily what I have to say, I don't know. I think so sometimes, but it's hard, it's hard to know necessarily to navigate and to think how much do I want to be of myself and put my own ideas into the world. And so that's also what the spaces and like the group has been about. And it's
Hmm.
really interesting to go back to the Twyman stuff because one of our members, Joshua the Branch, who's also been on Nick's show many times and the King of Cups channel, he was in a podcast that often hosted Tracy Twyman. So it really does come full circle. It like everything. I've met so many, not just through her work, but I met one of our other co-hosts, Solar Exile. He knows me through my Tantra Kabbalah work. We have another we call him the younger brother of the lodge, Matt Murrah. He's totally doing his own thing. He's like really into tarot, he's really into Kabbalah, he's really into astrology, but he keeps up with us. And he's like, you guys are right, but you guys are like, he thinks we're old. That's the real joke. Like I think Don Webb's cool from like 30 years ago, and he's like a 23-year-old, and he's saying, I won't even use a magic number. He's a 23-year-old, and he'll say, you guys are kind of like fixed in your ideas. And I try and tell them not to be fixed. I mean, it's not just me, but I always say, like, don't be fixed in your sort of dogmatism or ideology because you don't want to get aggregation, you don't want to get make klipas, right? That's
Hmm.
obviously I use very Kabbalistic language because I feel like that is our kind of common currency because it's people from all over the world as well. So it is quite incredible. I think that you get it, and I think that's why I was excited to sort of explain it, maybe in a
Yeah.
crazy discursive way.
So did you grow up Buddhist first or Catholic, or kind of both at the same time?
So both my parents are very superstitious. It's just been a part of my life that the
Hmm.
reality that people do use black magic. No, I'm not saying my parents or anything like that. I'm saying that it exists. The idea that it exists in the world is
Yeah.
not new to me in any capacity. That there
That's
is
cool.
also goodness in the world.
Hmm.
That is not, I don't have no problem. I actually think that that's good. I think we should cultivate that. Bodhicitta maxing, as the Zoomers call it. So I agree with that. And so, but I've had many dalliances with black magic, like Left Hand Path. I've been very honest about it because I think that the whole thing of coming back to Buddhism in my late 20s was the idea of personal rectification, but also because didn't, I had already advanced too far, Alex, into magic to sort of pretend like it wasn't real.
Yeah.
But I also needed to let it go because I could see it wasn't getting me to where I wanted.
Mhm.
Like I didn't really like who I was, to be honest. And so I knew I needed a lot. I needed to work on myself. And that's what's great about Tantra. It says work on it. You can. You're agential, just like magic. So it's kind of I'm not the only one. There are many other magicians, left hand path people who have embraced Buddhism. Now, do I know if it's sincere or not sincere? No, because you can never really know. You only know yourself. Like I only know what I think, really.
I think it's kind of cool that you kind of like I've maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but like you kind of can take different aspects of what you learn and kind of bring it into your own practice. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
You
Is
know,
that like a similar thing between Buddhism and kind of Hinduism in a way? Is you're allowed to coexist with everybody else and kind of pick up the different things from everybody or
so you kind of have to, right?
Mhm.
You kind of have to, like in the real world,
Yeah.
like in the actual day to day, quote unquote, this is going to be really, but lived experience, like the real life experiences of people.
Mhm.
Syncretism is natural. It's very natural. It's like you're encountering people, you're syncretizing, even if you've known them for 50 years. It doesn't matter. Just because that's discourse, that's conversation. That's what happens. You kind of meet you well, maybe you meet in fire or water, but sometimes you meet in the middle in synthesis. So sometimes at least. So yeah, I think that I try and think of things speculatively. I see a lot of overlap between especially certain Hindu ideas. Now I'm definitely not. This is a thing, Alex, is that Hinduism is a really inappropriate term, not because you used it, and there's no problem with you using it. Please continue to use it, but it doesn't describe
Yeah.
what it actually is.
Mhm.
It is actually a multitude of different texts, different sects, and totally different ideas of the world, sort of put under this umbrella of a word, a klipa, you could say,
Mhm.
called Hinduism. Now, a klipa is not inherently negative. It's just a vessel. It's just like a clay vessel. It's just a container for things. But what makes it negative is where you can't disaggregate it from what is actually inside of it. So that has actually happened with Hinduism. It has
Yeah.
actually become like all of these like very disparate things that sort of get pushed in together. And it's the problem is that India has seen a really strong sort of I guess you could say a religious orientation to what they call Vaishnavism, which is worship of Krishna or Vishnu, but usually not Vishnu. It's usually Krishna or Rama in particular, which is not, I'm not saying it's bad.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that those people tend to reimagine all the texts as being about those deities, or they reimagine the text to be about Vedic deities. There is no, I'm sorry to so many people on Twitter, and they're going to be so mad at me for saying this. There are no Vedic texts that are practiced in 2025 at all, 0%. Does not exist. Hinduism is not a Vedic religion, it's a pure Puranic religion. Now, what is really interesting about the Puranas is that they also have twilight language, just like Buddhism. And they also reject the yajna, the whole central idea of the Vedas. Now, why is this? Well, I'll just pretend that you asked me, Alex. But why is
Why is
this?
this?
Thank you. So, why is this? Because the yajna is not desirable. The yajna is like a state ritual function that is for it sacrifices men, elephants, eagles, horses, and dogs every day,
God.
dozens of them. Is
Yeah.
that a desirable return to tradition? I personally don't think so. So that's what Buddhism says. It's like these things are not, they're not authoritative. They don't necessarily have to, you can believe it if you want. That's fine. I'm not going to take part in that. That's not something that
Mhm.
I'm interested in. I'm interested in like furthering my state of consciousness and like disaggregating myself and think and really engaging in the world in the ways that I can do better and be better.
Mhm.
I'm not really interested in like recreating like we was kangs from 2,500 years ago. Like not really my
Yeah.
thing. So basically that's what it is in a nutshell. And I think that Hinduism has become very decoherent, especially now. And I think a lot of people misunderstand what it is. And I think even part of my initial project, especially when I first started specifically talking so much about Tantra, was in response to the amount of Kali Kola people. And I have no problem with Kali Kola, which is basically it's tantric schools, you could say sampradayas, that are particularly focused on the goddess Kali. But if you really understand Tantra, really, really, and I'm not saying I really, really, but I'm saying that I have a degree of understanding, is she's not the number one goddess, because the destruction of time can only be a mover. It can never be a prime. I know I rhyme, but that is really the truth. Like, that's even in Pythagoras. You can go and look at what he has to say about the number one. It's not the number one. It's really takes expression in the three. So Tantra also, it has different ways to resolve these ideas numerically, and you could say that all metaphysics really is math. Sure, 100%. You could say that. Obviously, I'm not that mathematical, so I need the mythology. I need the colors. I need the. You have to kind of give me the framework. I'm not able to just recreate it. Now, I know people who are brilliant physicists and all that. I'm sure that a math cell could easily do it, but I'm not that person. So I need the mythology. So that's where Hinduism is strong for me, is that it has the mythology, it
Mhm.
has the tree, it has the ideas. Now, how do you understand those ideas? Are they quote unquote, and I don't mean this in any way political, are they progressive ideas? Meaning that, are they able to take you further in consciousness without getting sick of? That's sort of that's always the game, right? That's always the
Yeah.
trick. Like, can it take me where I want to go, which is maybe to the top of the tree, if that's your goal, and that's not everyone's goal, that's fine. But if that's your goal, or ejection from the cube, like, don't you want to go about that in the safest, fastest, and also perhaps less karmically implicative way possible? From my perspective, yes. So I think you always have to take on board new ideas as well. So I try and be sympathetic to certain kinds of Hinduism, like Shaivism. Obviously, the goddess cults, Shaktiism, is very similar, very, very similar to certain ideas in Tantric Buddhism. Obviously, the Nuwari Buddhism, they call it, but it's also a kind of Hinduism as well that they practice in Nepal. This has been a deep influence on me, as it has been on many teachers, because of the syncretism involved. So I won't lie to you, Alex, and say that it doesn't, in terms of looking at things maybe with fresh idea, a fresh sort of vision, you could say. I'm open to it.
Mhm.
However, I do prefer Dharma. So I think that's also my strength, is that I can be kind of rooted or anchored in something that
Mhm.
accepts that I look at other things, but maybe I bring it back into sort of that view that that's what we would call it, the view, or the Buddhist view.
Mhm. So does the Hindu kind of religion stem from Vedic like text, or is Vedic that kind of terminology or civilization or whatever their beliefs were, was that something completely different?
So basically, the Vedas are somewhat understood by people who call themselves Hindu in a way, but their deities don't actually relate to those deities. Like, there is some people will say, I know people will fight me to the death, and that's fine, but I'm right at the end of the day, is that the Vedic gods are not one who they become in the Puranas. They're very much different. They've taken on very different new ideas. So
Okay.
to say they're one to one, I have a big problem with that. But again, I can't control what other people think or do or believe or practice. So
Yeah.
don't come at me. But for me, I definitely think that there is a big separation. I also
Mhm.
think that that's okay. That doesn't mean that's not wrong. That just is like, people have retold and repackaged the, if you want to call it quote unquote perennial. But I'm not really a perennialist, but I'm an axialist. But we'll use that kind of idea, or word, perennialism. So it's a perennial idea that people repackage the same stories in different ways to suit that particular yuga or Aeon or Kelpa.
Mhm.
That's okay. That's no problem. As long as you don't get stuck on that story, as long as the paradoxes that arise in the creation or synthesis of that story don't negate the more deeper kinds of metaphysical ideas. Because if you start to use negation, this is a very Kabbalistic idea, but if you use negation, you actually can begin to hurt people in the sense that they're not able to climb the tree through that text or through those things. So Buddhism posits itself directly one to one as a rectification of not necessarily the Vedic story, but that is also contained in Buddhism. Very interestingly, the gods are murdered very horrifically, eaten, made into jewelry, flayed into corpses, and then they're reconstituted and brought back to life. So Buddhism posits itself as a rectification of the Vedic gods, but more importantly, of the Vedic Sanskrit itself, the word itself. But Hinduism is definitely based on the Puranas, but there are people who do read and practice the Upanishads. But really, what is called Hinduism in 2025 is Shastras, which are texts that come right from the Puranas, but they're also tantric shastras that are about ritual performance. So if you see, like, go to any Hindu temple in India, but it depends, right? Like I said, Shaivism, so preference to worshiping Shiva as the primary deity, that is for a Christian or for a Jew. Those things are going to have a lot more similarity. You're going to see things that you recognize. Mm-hmm. If you go to a Krishna temple, you might think that there's elements that are similar, but the story, it doesn't quite line up because he's not anyone's son. Gotcha. He's like his own, totally, it's not even he's his own thing because he's not even at the pinnacle for most people that are more metaphysical, right? But if you're just a normie Krishna, okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem. I'm just saying that it's not the deepest layer. But when you're getting into Shiva, you're getting something deeper. Now, when you're getting to his wife, Shakti, you're getting into something much deeper. That's probably the deepest layer, but then you're getting into the tantric layer. So this is part of the problem, is that very few people really understand what tantra is, because there's this idea in some circles of Buddhism that you cannot approach these other kinds of tantras because they're so ferocious and they require so much carnal ground activity. But if you study Buddhist tantra seriously, you will see that a lot of those same ideas are almost in the text one to one. In fact, you can hold up the text one to one and find very subtle word changes. Sanskrit's a very alchemical language. So that actually can be relatively serious to have, changes in the Sanskrit, but to have the text be almost one to one for the most part, it's pretty incredible. And you can say that, yeah, there must be a similarity, but where we begin and end is that we say, okay, well, if you interpret this text, you have to interpret it in our way. So even though it might say ferocious things and, corpse sadhana, and yes, part of that is true, but it's also, it's much more conceptual than it is physical or material. So I would say, I don't know, that was a very meandering way to answer your question, but Hinduism exists to a degree, but to what exactly is it? It's very imprecise. And it's hard for me, who is like a religion autist in a way, because I like to, cast things into their proper epistemologies or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's very important for me, I think, because that's how Tantra sees things as well. Like, very much you have to understand where things come from, where things are going, and also where things are. So your sense of time is very strong in the sense that you're looking at the chronologies of things. So Hinduism, I don't know. I personally am Buddhist. So for me, Buddhist Dharma is it. But I hope that, there are some very interesting ideas in Hinduism. Now, a lot of podcasters are very obsessed with like the Mahabharata and the Vedas themselves. I personally, this is just me, but I personally feel like that is not particularly useful because those things are just mythologies or cosmologies. And I don't know if it's really great to get stuck on those things. And people tend to project themselves also into those texts. Mm-hmm. And say, yeah, there's magic vehicles described in this text. Well, how do you know? Are those magic vehicles? Is the guy who's writing, is the Rishi writing the Vedas, is he talking about a magic vehicle, or is he talking about Merkaba? Or is he talking about palace architecture, wisdom science? Right? Like, and these
Mhm.
are ideas that Tantra, excuse me, these are questions that Tantra asks of the Vedas, and the Vedas cannot inherently of themselves reconcile them. So there was this other text that was compiled called the Atharvadas. This is really the origin of sort of metaphysics, Indian metaphysics. The Atharvadas really only were compiled in the first and second century,
Mhm.
the same time that Buddhist Tantra was first emerging. So, can you really say that our metaphysical ideas, looking at the Vedas or the Mahabharatas, are really contemporary to those times? No, we don't really understand those texts, and that's okay. But Buddhism posits that we can use the Sanskrit to actually maybe do something interesting, maybe alter reality to help ourselves, maybe alter reality to help each other, maybe alter reality to, fuck the archons. I don't know.
So when did you start to actually practice magic?
So
I guess.
I have to say that I've probably been dabbling since I was a kid, if I'm being honest.
Mhm.
I think like I grew up around, like it would, as I said, it just was not, it was not foreign to me as a concept, although I always tried to remain within like the confines of institutional mysticism, or like I was really obsessed with the saint hagiographies. I'm sorry, I can't even speak, but the saint hagiographies for a long time. Then I became obsessed with stigmata. Then I was obsessed with, there were so many different things. So basically, I was always interested in magic, and Saint Magic obviously caught my eye right away. But I think there's a lot of, I definitely dabbled in everything. I read, Chaos Magic was called to me. I got really involved with the left hand path for a little while. And I could see that I was not using like a tantric view because maybe I didn't even have that view back then. And I don't think I did. I think I was very much like the exact thing that I criticize now, or would say that I don't agree with now, is that I got very lost in like that kind of world of the self and world of the mind. So I've definitely been off and on, but it's been part of my whole life. It's been part of what I've been interested in even before magic sort of became something else in reality for me. I would say since I was like a little kid, little kid, I have always been interested in this archetype of the mage, archetype of the sort of, I don't know if I called it the Quicksilver Surfer way back then, but I probably had a sort of conceptualizations of it similar. Or Doctor Strange, pre-Marvel movies. Okay, so this is not in relation to that.
Mhm.
One thing, actually, to answer your question in an interesting way, maybe, is my dad read Indonesian comic books, which are actually Chinese comic books, but they're translated into Bahasa.
Hmm.
In order to make us learn Indonesian as kids, he would bring the comics back, Chinese comics, but again, written in Indonesian. So he would make us read them. Chinese comics are really interesting because they talk about this hidden world, the Jianghu. So, this world that exists between the rivers and the lakes. If you're thinking this sounds familiar, there's a great movie on this called The Water Margin or Outlaws of the March from 1968, Taiwanese. And so it's basically a magic story, is basically what it was. And it's a magic story. And so all of these ideas of heroes and outlaws and people being born as the reincarnation or the rebirth of magical stars, which is a big part of that story of the water margin. The
Damn.
heroes are actually born as the evil stars. They're actually the evil stars reincarnated in order to rectify their evil existence. Really interesting. And the way that they sort of reimagine the world is they have to go up against the corrupt officials. And then the heroes, the quote unquote goody goodies, they're actually the good stars and they're evil. They're reborn on this world because they cannot give up their cravings, their desires, their greed, all their bullshit. They cannot let it go. So all being said, basically all Chinese comics are downstream of the water margin, basically, or Journey to the West with the Monkey King. So they're basically all downstream of these stories, which have Buddhist, Taoist, and maybe more, just maybe magical sort of cosmologies within them. Tengriist, shamanist, whatever you want to call it. It's all in there. So all the comic books are like this. So I would say that I always saw myself in those people, in those characters. There's a really famous one called, well, they call it Oriental Heroes, which I know some people don't like, but uh, Dragon Tiger Gate is another one. So basically, this comes from that kind of like 70s, 80s milieu of Chinese comic books, and I always saw, I was like that's me. They're swordsmen. I wasn't a swordsman, but we did do martial arts, and they do magic. That's basically what it is. They cultivate. They're self cultivators, and they're trying to shift reality in specific ways with elemental sort of techniques and breathing and theurgy, and but they don't really rely on spirits. So I think this is where actually I was right. The one thing I was right in my whole life was that you don't rely on external spirits in necessarily. I'm not saying that they don't exist or anything like that, but I'm saying
Hmm.
for the most part, I think it doesn't serve the magician to use them. So I think that that is, if I want to say an archetype, who is my archetype? Dragon Tiger Gate. So if you don't know what that is, you can go watch. It's a great movie actually,
Hmm.
and but they that's my archetype. So that's what I grew up around. So I think I saw myself in it my whole life, and the Monkey King as well, because that obviously plays a lot into Twitter and Wukong Reborn. And I talk a lot about this, how the Monkey King in Chinese Buddhism is a Dharma protector. He is like a manifestation of the Buddhist power to defend people or defend the Dharma, at least, which is the truth or the primordial way, or however you want to describe it. There's many ways. But so I think it's part of that too. I think that inherently Buddhism is inherently psychedelic, inherently magical, and accepts these worldviews as real, but also says it's not quite real. Maybe it's just a greater narrative. Maybe these are the stories we need to tell ourselves in order to produce altered state of consciousness that doesn't involve necessarily psychedelics, but it's more, it's meditation, it's fasting, it's all of it. It's like combined all in all. So you can say that the Monkey King definitely also represents that. So maybe those two things brought together, but they're also the same thing. So that's kind of non-dual too. Is the Monkey
Hmm.
King? He is a wuxia character. He is a Zhenghu character, but he's also a heavenly character and he's also an earthly character. He has all these sort of composite archetypes, but he's reconciled in that he actually does this mission to retrieve the sutras or sometimes the tantras and bring them back to China. So that's also interesting. So he's performing like this sort of knowledge gathering, you could say, story as well. So I think that all of what I'm saying is that this greater cosmology of saints and heroes, gods and devils, has greatly influenced me in the ways that I think of the world and the ways that I identify myself as a magician or a sorcerer.
When you first started, was there like a specific type of magic that you were kind of targeting or looking into? Any kind of specific books?
Basically, I think if I was going to tell people now, I wouldn't tell them to read what I read, because I don't necessarily think that. I think I would say the things that people said to me, probably like follow Buddhism, you'll be fine. Like, you'll learn magic later. Like, don't worry
Mhm.
about it. I think that would have been better advice. Now, obviously, I didn't listen to that. So, there were, I highly recommend Don Webb, everything Don Webb's ever written. I think it's great personally. I spoke to Toby with Solar. For both of us, that was quite seminal. So very cool. I think Toby does a great job in explaining what magic is. Magic is not just the will. But maybe there's also part of magic that's perception as well.
Hmm.
So this actually has a very deep, I won't get into it, but it has a very, what I think is a profound sort of metaphysical implication as well. But regardless, I think that there are many good books and many good authors, but I think my best advice, instead of saying a specific book, or you could explore Dharma. I'll posit that as number one, but maybe number two is don't be fixed. Don't You can view whatever, like you can read whatever you want. I was a big fan of Agrippa. You wanted to know what I was reading at 14? I was reading Agrippa,
Damn.
Paracelsus,
Hmm.
Culpeper. I was interested in all that shit because all that stuff, they're Christian. And I didn't know if I was Christian or not, but I was like, I want to stick to a kind of idea that is not so far away from what I actually know.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason I ask is because I feel like just like anything like genuine, like it kind of gets hijacked by like people bullshitting or just trying to make money or whatever. And so there is a lot like you go to a metaphysical section at like a bookstore and you got to sift through a lot of bullshit to kind of find like real or whatever like you feel is real. But
Well, go get Peter Carroll. Go read Liber Null. If you want a book, go read Liber Null and then go read Agrippa right after that. The three
interesting.
books on occult philosophy, and also maybe even include the fourth one by Francis Barrett, The Celestial Intelligencer. I love that, the Magus. There's a great essay on the role of the magician in the universe, and it has honestly stayed with me this entire time. If you're interested in a
Cool.
more Buddhist idea on metaphysics, you can
Mhm.
go look up a teacher called Ju Nipam Rinpoche, who started the Rime movement in the 19th century. He was a very great sorcerer himself. And he also tried to look at the world, at least he tried, in the similar way that I try, is that he tried to look at Hindu tantras, Christian ideas, Gnostic ideas, all of these ideas, and say, is this in keeping with Buddhism? Can we utilize it? Does the text work? And he was equally as brutal with the Buddhist text too, because there are multiple different Buddhist schools. So if something didn't work, he wasn't really interested in it. And he would say, discard. So also the Bible. The Bible is extremely metaphysical text. It can also serve as a spell text. I know that makes people very uncomfortable to say that, but it can.
Yeah, no, I mean a lot of
And
people use it for magic and that type of spell work. Yeah.
the word is magic.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. The Bible's absolutely magic. It's full of metaphysical things. If you want to read the Psalms, one magical operation, maybe I'll give you that, Alex, instead of a book recommendation per se.
Yeah.
Reading Psalm 19. One way is to start doing that on a new moon. You read Psalm 19, all parts, including the Hebrew letter. You read it every day, and you can break it up. I think there are 21 individual components in that psalm, so you can actually break it up into threes. So then you do it for 21 days, and then you do it morning, noon, and night. I know that's very long, but it's not that bad.
Mhm.
Not that it's not like not saying do your high guardian angel, but that's actually a good that's a good practice to for people to start out. Just like it takes capacity. It
Mhm.
it does. It takes, even in Tibetan, we say like it takes lung capacity. You have to have the air in order to say the words potently
Yeah.
without exhausting yourself, without exhausting your life force. So you have to kind of build up like these metaphysical capacities. And it also starts in your breath. I know Nick talked about this with you a lot, like the importance of meditation. This is something him and I discuss a lot.
Mhm.
That's number one.
Yeah.
Number one, you have to be meditating. Now you can meditate like I do with mantra japa, which is just the recitations. That's perfectly fine. People need to hear that, I think. I know everybody's Vipassana pilled and they won't like that I'm saying that, but I think from my perspective, a tantric perspective, that's a perfectly fine way to go. You can also do Vipassana, you can do Dzogchen. There's so much out there for people, but you have to be meditating. You can do Christian meditations. Loyola, he offers them. I mean, there's so many people. Hildegard of Bingen, she talks about how to do Christian meditations on the passions. And anything you want, any flavor of kind of like visualization you want, it exists in the world. So you just have to do it, I would say.
Yeah, so like as you kind of started like learning about and started like doing some of this magic, did you notice any institutions that you might have grown up around or maybe seen later on in life that are kind of practicing some of this, maybe unknowingly
So it's
or
it's clearly impossible to go away from in Catholicism and Greek
Mhm.
Orthodoxy. I mean, the Greek Orthodox cross is just like a Kabbalistic tree. It's so obvious. It's like one to one.
Yeah.
Even the way that the bottom cross is off kilter, there's even a reason in Kabbalah why that is. So they can pretend all they want. It's right there. Anyone
Hmm.
who knows knows. Um, it's very magic. All of those religions are very magic. Mormonism is very magic. I'm not a Mormon. I don't want to be a Mormon. I have nothing against them. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's a lot of Mormon podcasters. Uh, there's a lot of all of them have magic. All of them understand to a degree. I'm not sure of what degree. I think it's a lot has been very degraded, to go back to that Aeonic idea.
Hmm.
I think that a lot of our institutions, if we're talking about like we're gone outside of Kali Yuga is done. But what are the ramifications of that? Well, the ramifications of Kali Yuga is sort of like the degradation of Saturnian institutions. I don't mean that in the bad way. I'm not saying Saturn is the bad guy. I don't think that. But institutions, by their nature, are both Saturnian and solar at the same time because they have an outer face and an occulted face. The occulted face is not inherently evil, but it can be, right? It can be turned into that by people working in the shadows. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can just be the way the bureaucracies are klipothic. This is actually a really interesting part or point, excuse me. Bureaucracies by themselves, this is known in Kabbalah since like the 16th century. If you create a corporation and you create all these sort of sub companies underneath it, you're actually doing Kabbalistic work. You're actually drawing into the tree of death. So people can make of that whatever they want to make of that, but that is a kind of way to look at it. So when institutions crumble, it's not necessarily the worst because things sometimes have to get destroyed in order to see how you want to remake it. I think that's a more positive way to think of it.
Yeah.
So I think that all these institutions are at these kinds of, you could say, breaking points or points of decay. That's not necessarily bad. That's not necessarily saying that they can't be remade into something better, even. But stagnancy is probably the enemy of the magician. And so I would say that it's harder in a strictly institutional setting. If you're really interested in magic, I'm not saying you, Alex, but I'm sure you are probably, is that institutional settings have their limitations in how far like modern people are like people who are hungry, how far they're going to go. I don't necessarily think that the Aeon is about being contained. I often say that, like, be uncontained, be a little decoherent, because that is kind of the flavor. We have to kind of be our own, we have to bring discernment into mercy. Mercy doesn't just exist by itself. It's not laying yourself down at someone's feet or, being boundaryless in your material world. It's about actually using discernment and strength in order to bolster those instances of mercy. So, or loving kindness, however you want to, whatever word you want to use. Mm-hmm. So you have to sort of be able to have the strength to draw from institutions to a degree, meaning that their text, their corpus, the actual bodies, very much like corpus sadhana, right? Corpus of text. You have to be able to take individual constituent seeds, maybe primordial seeds. We call them bijas in Tantra. It refers to the seeds of a pomegranate. In fact, very similar to Kabbalah, because they also refer to the seeds of a pomegranate. And so you have to be able to take the seeds without kind of prejudice. I think that's a good word. But you cannot be married to those institutions necessarily. Like, you don't want them necessarily preserved or you want them destroyed. You're kind of neutral, true neutral.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to navigate the landscape, and the landscape is quite decoherent, and it is quite, I don't think that there's any institution set up specifically for people who are like, I want to go all the way. I want to study magic. I think the best way is like study Kabbalah, study Buddhism, meditate, and then that's your way in. And then if you want to join a Dharma center, or if you're more interested in certain ideas, or you want to be a Greek Orthodox, that's fine. There's a lot of people I know personally who are also magicians who are also Greek Orthodox. So I'm just saying it's possible. You can do both things. It's about how you, again, reconcile those kinds of things. Are you a magician like secretly doing black mass? Well, that wouldn't really be useful, really, because why would you even belong to the institution to begin with? That's just being subversive. You could just if you want to do black mass, like, I don't want to do that. I don't want anything to do with it. But if you want to do that, that's fine. Then go do that away from me. But You don't need to be an orthodox person to do that, right? You can
Mhm.
just be a magician. You can just be like, I'm gonna actually follow the biblical way, but we're gonna do these other things that help us sort of energetically build capacity and prepare also our consciousness to have these higher experiences, maybe to know God. I know Nick often says it like that, like the highest Kabbalistic Sephirotic experiences or crossing these abyss experiences that he's had, and him and I have discussed this many times, is that it is love. That is the number one grade A, like not even grade A, it's triple S. It's like the triple S ranked boss. That is it's love. That's number one. That's what you experience at the very top. That's my experience. You don't have to believe it, but that's what I think.
Yeah.
And that's what I've experienced. So for us, and I'm not speaking for Nick, but I'm going to say, for us, I think that is really the conclusion of all of it. Is like, yeah, everybody is entitled to have these experiences. Are you going to have it all in one life? Maybe not, but that's why we have reincarnation. We're rebirth. You can come back and do it all again until you figure out a way to sort of reconcile your karmas and get yourself out. And maybe you don't want to go, and that's okay too.
Yeah. So do you see this existence that we're in as a soul evolution?
So I don't believe in a soul, Alex, but I'm okay with using that language to
Hmm.
describe it. I don't believe in a soul because I don't believe in a fixed self. So it's not that I'm against a soul. Sometimes people say
Hmm.
this about Buddhism, is they'll say, "Oh, you guys don't believe in a soul." Well, we don't believe in a fixed self. Like I'm not the same person I was when I was 2 or
Hmm.
10 or 22 or whatever magic number I want to use. I'm not the same person. I've
Yeah.
traveled through time and space and become a very different person. My ideas shift all the time. That doesn't mean that I don't have grounding or footing in the real world. It just means that I'm different. So if my consciousness is different, then hopefully my spiritual essence also reflects that difference, meaning that it cannot be fixed or eternal. So I do believe it is possible to escape samsara if someone so chooses. Some people do choose that. I think that that's a worthy and admirable. Obviously, that's the highest soteriological sort of like exit from the black cube matrix, if you want to call it that. Idea in Buddhism is that you will go and either embody Buddha consciousness or be luminousness and masslessness in what's called a non-returner realm. Um, I just think I call it often. It's just diamond thunder. That's really what the essence is. It's this kind of pristine state of consciousness that is available to us at all times, every day. But because we're marred so much in our own thinking, our own bullshit, our own, the mass media,
Yeah.
everything. Like I like anime. I'm the first to say it. I like it because it's Kabbalistic. I like it because it talks about magic, but it's bullshit too. It's all bullshit because it's all like mind fetters to sort of keep you. Yeah, it can
Like
give you
kind of
tools.
distracted.
Yeah, but we're here. We're on the material world. I'm not saying like we need to like. I'm I am middle path, so I don't take that idea that we have to just get out. But I think we should try, and I think we should also sort of integrate it into our personal lives because I think that the great work is really ourselves.
Hmm.
I don't think it's some HGA. Yeah, like yes, I've tried to do that myself. I've never talked about this. I'll give you a little bit, Alex, of a totally unexplored lore, but
Hmm.
I don't think it's that. I really don't. I think it's that kind of pristine consciousness that you can get in meditation, deep meditation, that kind of crossing the abyss experience that Nick talks about.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody can do it. And I think that's what's desirable, to sort of integrate that into our worldly life. Because
Hmm.
another interesting thing of Buddhism is we don't posit the human world as some kind of punishment at all. The human world is actually the best. We are in the best position to rectify all our karmas. Being reborn here is a privilege and it's special. And it means we're agential of our own will. And
Interesting.
so I just think if we believe that, like you don't have to believe that, and that's okay with me, but I do believe that. So for me, I kind of think, and I'm not perfect by any means. I'm not saying this on, on a Clydesdale or a high horse or anything. It's completely me as a flawed person. as a
Yeah.
flawed vehicle, imperfect vehicle saying this. But I think like if you do believe that, then why wouldn't you want to engage with these? I'm going to quote my co-host Solar Exile, but noetic processes. Why aren't you engaging with wisdom sciences right now? And I think that that's the real way, if you want to say like aeonic shifts forward. Maybe that is the age of Aquarius that everybody was freaking out about, in 2022, like saying like, oh, they're trying to push it, but maybe it was already happening. Maybe we don't even have to frame it like the age of Aquarius. Maybe we don't frame it in terms of Laurel Canyon. Maybe we don't frame it in those kinds of sicko ways. Maybe
Hmm.
we frame it. I'm just saying you can frame it as Aeon of the Daughter, and of course they'll be flattered and happy. But you could frame it as this. It's like a progressive Aeon, not political again, but just a moving forward. We're going to actually take what works. We're going to discard the rest, like true sorcerers on the carnal ground, right? We're going to discard the corpses that don't work, and we're going to take the ones that do, and we're going to take the ones that take us into higher states of consciousness and sort of rectify our relationship with both the world, meaning ourselves and our minds, but also with each other and also with like the natural landscape, which I don't think is God per se, but I do think that there is a natural relationship that people have with their environment. And I think that we've gone away so much from that. And this is not like I'm not a peacenik, hippie, tree hugger person. I'm much more of like a barefoot John Bircher. But the reality is I do believe that we have like a geoontological responsibility and relationship to the land. And I
Hmm.
think that that is also part of being like, I'm not necessarily American, as in like in the lower 48, but I'm in North America. And I think this is a big thing of living on the new world. And I love this framing. And I did steal it a little from the Mormons because they obviously are the most famous for doing this kind of reimagining of the biblical myths on the new world. But I actually think, what if they're actually seeing something? And I don't believe in the book of Enoch literally, but what if they're seeing something really interesting when they're here? So maybe there is something like magical, special, new about like where we live. If you look at a map, it looks like a turtle's back. That's very interesting. 5,000 years ago in China, they were describing the world as being on a turtle's back. The Tantras describe the world existing, the Brahmaloka existing on the turtle's back. It's very interesting.
Hmm.
And I just think maybe you can just expand your imaginal, as Gordon White would say, and like, but you can be more expansive. You can say, yeah, maybe that's a story, but maybe I also choose to think it's partly real or all real. Maybe actually we are in a special place. And maybe the wheel turning has much more to do with North America. Maybe that's the whole point, is like that's the what the whole idea of the new world is, finding the golden mountain, as the Chinese would call North America back in the 17 and 1800s. It's just very metaphysically important, right? Because the Mormons also call it that. Why would they call it that? Why would you have these very
Yeah.
seemingly disparate sort of like groups coming to America at the same similar times, talking about the same thing in very different religious and cosmological frameworks? I just think that's very interesting. I think you can look at North America as somewhere special, and also where people came together, like for a long, long time.
Yeah.
You have the Métis people in Saskatchewan, Manitoba. You have I was just discussing with someone today that you had like the Manila Village in Louisiana Bayous. All of those people eventually married into Creole families, so they became Creole. It's interesting how the American experiment has happened. So I tend to take a positivistic view of it, and even though there are clearly very tumultuous times that we're in, very
Hmm.
decoherent, very toxic times, and I mean in every way, not just, I'm not speaking partisan in any way. I'm
Hmm.
saying, I'm kind of saying fuck all the archons, but also we have to live in the real world.
Yeah.
So basically I just think that we're in a special place, maybe in a special time, and what do we do with that information?
Have you found any evidence of, like, I guess maybe they weren't called the Chinese, but the Chinese in that area at the time having maps from over here? I feel like I've found like a couple where they're like depicting routes to the West Coast,
It
calling
definitely happened in my
America
opinion.
like Pusang, I believe. Yeah.
I definitely think it's real. like
Hmm.
exactly what you're saying. I think that the one that I know of, I'm sure there are multiple maps, and I'm just limited in my information.
Yeah.
But there was a famous one from Zhang He, who was a Muslim. He was a Muslim, but he was ethnically Chinese.
Hmm.
But he was a famous pirate slash ship captain and also army general. And he actually sailed to Australia, sailed to South Africa, and perhaps even sailed to Vancouver Island. Now, what's really interesting in the thing that you just brought up
Hmm.
is that the intermarriage between the Chinese and the indigenous people in Vancouver has actually been happening for a very long time, since at least the 1700s.
Wow.
And they didn't necessarily consider it bad. And I'm not saying that they would necessarily place a positive or negative value on it, but there seemed to be sort of a customary understanding that it would be okay rather than like an exogamous marriage, right? Because a lot of tribes are like that. Like you're not really allowed to marry outside.
Hmm.
So they said it was okay. Just think that that's interesting. They have a trading culture. They have the potluck culture. That's obviously where the word potluck comes from. Also the word Indian giver from their potlatches, because the richest man would quote unquote give away all his possessions. That's not really what happened, but it's an approximation of what happened. So
Hmm.
um, it's a very vital and it's a very temperate place of the world. So why I say that is because Canada is very harsh in general, environmentally and temperature wise, especially in the winter, obviously.
Hmm.
Vancouver is a very temperate place. And it's also a deep water dry dock or boat dock, excuse me. Like there are deep water protected areas where big ships could actually land. So I think it's 100% plausible. I think it's interesting that the first Chinatown was in Victoria, then Vancouver, then San Francisco. I mean, there's something. I think you're onto something with that. I think North America, I think many people think North America is special. I don't think this is like I joke about the Mormons, but I don't specifically think it's them. I also think the native people understood fundamentally. I'm not saying a value judgment if they're good or bad, but I think that they had a kind of if you want to call it pre-diluvian, that's fine. I don't really believe in that, but if you do, that's okay. But I'm saying that I think they had an idea of religion and the world very similar to Central Asians. This sort of turning the swastika, Navajos still use that in medicine. They will do it clockwise or counterclockwise. It's very interesting because that's also a tantric idea.
So you said the Navajo uses that?
Yeah, well, not just the Navajo. In fact, it spans pretty much all of North America. The sort of putting in clockwise or counterclockwise offerings, depending on what the ceremonial function is.
Yeah, I just saw it's like a corn or like some kind of palace. Shit, I could pull it up real quick. It's like a replica of one that was destroyed in Fort Worth out here. But it had that swastika kind of not. I think it was just straight on. It was a little bit different than, obviously the Germans used, but I was interested like because it was like in Missouri. It was like in the Midwest somewhere in the kind of late 1800s. So it was definitely like just out of place for the size and architecture. And I guess like the people that they said were settling that area at the time. I just found it very odd and out of place. But yeah, I'll try to pull it up. I think it's super fascinating that the Navajo were using it.
Well, to riff off what you just said, I think that the mounds are very important. I
Hmm.
don't think that they're what people are describing. There's a young Polish dude, I forgot his name, Andreas something. We interviewed him on Nick's show. He
Hmm.
talked about it very similar to how I would present it if it was me, and that it's strictly conceptual. It's kind of like places that are built maybe on metaphysically important areas, but they're really meant to have experiences of consciousness or magical experiences. They're kind
Hmm.
of vehicles to take you there, but not literally. That's not going to fly away, but maybe you'll fly away in your mind. So if you sit on top of the snake mound on a specific night of the eclipse, chanting this specific name of God, I'm just using that as an example,
Hmm.
burning these specific plants, doing these ritual gestures, that's not necessarily the way to get there, but it's all going to help you. It's all ritual technology to sort of take you to where you want to go. So
Yeah.
I do think personally the Missouri snake mounds are very important. I think there's a great Jason Berry book he talks about like these Europeans, and it's interesting. The Missouri River snake cult also had European practitioners, but there was a African contingent and a native contingent, and they all practiced snake handling in the same odd Missouri snake cult bent. And then they also had a snake mound. Well, there's a snake mound in St. Louis.
Damn. Yeah.
So yeah.
And there's like so many of those kind of sites, like the mounds. Have you found any like evidence of what's underneath, what's grown over top of them?
So for me, I have podcasted with people who are very studied them in depth and discuss them like regularly. For me, I just take it 100% speculative. So I've been to mounds, I live near a mound, but for me, I just think, okay, ritually important area, ritually important site. What were they doing? I don't know. Most people don't know. There are very few people who really get it. And I'm not quite sure if they even get it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that, yes, these are perhaps older alignments. There is a clear astrotheological sort of layer. There is sort of geomantic, like I'm saying feng shui in a way, but it's not. It's really more Masonic. It's more grid system, looking at the longitude and latitude of things, and then their alignment, and then all the magic numbers, making sure they all add up. So I think there's also something to that. But I also think that perhaps the mounds are a kind of indigenous way to pin the ley lines. This is an idea that I have discussed. Is
Mm-hmm.
I think most modern architecture, not just modern, but I think most architecture in the history of the world, maybe, especially sacred architecture, quote unquote, is meant to pin the natural ley lines of the world. That's not necessarily good or bad,
Yeah.
but I do think that it is an attempt to utilize like the natural sort of flow of energy, because the world is always described as a corpse or a body, especially of a goddess. I'm not saying it's like an earth mother goddess who's going to like eat us like I described, but I'm saying that I do think that there is a use in that metaphor, because a body has a system of subtle energy systems, which we call wind channels, or it can be likened to that of a river. So if you look at where the mounds are, all mounds, not just snake mounds, they're always in relationship to a river, and the supernal river is also in the sky. So even in that, their relationship to astrotheological fixed stars or whatever, that is also kind of speaking to the same thing, the sky and the earth coming together. And that is kind of the story of all metaphysical experiences. It's kind of the Jewish mysticism would call it the vehicle and the palace. Those would be the kind of ways Islamic metaphysics would also describe it in similar terms.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's what they are. They're both vehicles and they're both palaces, because the palace really is your mind. That's what we say in Buddhism, that the mind palace is really in your mind. It doesn't really exist. It's not like someplace you go. Maybe it's maybe it's Tracy Twyman and you're like unlocking the secret door and you're walking through the pink ray and into another dimension you go. Maybe, but maybe it is also in your consciousness. And maybe that's really the true essence of the palace. But the vehicle is also our bodies. So that's actually really interesting, because it says there's something fundamentally real about actually our experience. So I always say that maybe I try and counter signal people who overly promote a kind of simulated worldview, or they'll say, oh, we're trapped in the simulation, trapped in the black cube matrix. And are you trapped in your own mind? I don't know. I don't think
Yeah.
you have to be.
Yeah, kind of in a way, like you, through your thoughts and the way you view everything, kind of you can set your own perception.
Well said, Alex. So that brings us to sort of like my last thing that I wanted to, at least, if obviously I'll take whatever you want to talk about, but
Mm-hmm.
McLuhan. This has been a very interesting sort of way that I've recently been looking at magic, because we had someone join the Grey Lodge, our co-host circle, named Joseph Reed, and he works with Marshall McLuhan's son. and Andrew McLuhan in the McLuhan archives. And Marshall McLuhan was talking about this in the 60s and 70s, that magic is all about perception, and also that you can break sort of old and bad ideas of the world through also perception. So, like what you just said, believing the kind of story that you want to tell of the world or that you believe in. Maybe you have a very specific worldview that you want to adhere to. So that's okay, because just like Joseph Campbell said, there is a multitude of different ways that people climb the tree or ride the dragon or are sort of embody heroic or maybe anti-heroic archetypes. There are multiple ways to climb the tree, and I think that the multiple perspectives can be so useful. Not because
Mhm.
you have to be fixed in them again, but just simply because it's a useful personal exercise. Can you
Yeah.
handle someone else's worldview? What if it contradicts you?
Yeah, you see people that go like way too far, even with like the Christianity, and they
Mm-hmm,
start to
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
become extremely judgmental and
Yes.
start calling things satanic
Mm-hmm.
and like demonic. I'm like, bro, you're drinking the blood of Jesus some symbolically like every Sunday. I don't even think like people even think about that or really like the context that that could hold. Do you see that in like a weird way, like the fact that Christians like, or I mean, I'm not talking shit or whatever, but
No, you can talk shit. I mean, I'm
just
not Christian. I'm not repping for them, but I'm
well.
just saying I do like Christian Kabbalah. I'll just
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that. But
Well,
yeah,
do you think do you find it odd that like they like to worship Jesus, they drink the blood, like symbolically, obviously, drink the blood and eat the body?
look, Alex, it's
Um,
super tantric. It's the concept of five meats and the five nectars. I mean, it's not quite the full concept. Obviously, we're much more elaborate. And again, just conceptual. It's not
mhm,
real.
yeah.
Yes, they do talk about ferocious things, but they each have an allegorical meaning. So just like in Christianity. So I do think it's hypocritical because they're talking about alchemical transmutation, which I have no problem with. Obviously,
Yeah.
I like magic, so I think it's cool as fuck,
Mhm.
personally.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to transmute bread into, flesh or whatever, or the host, and you're going to transmute the wine into blood. Like, that sounds cool. You're not hurting anything,
Mhm.
you know? So for me, I do think it's hypocritical. I think hypocrisy is probably one of our worst sins right now for most people. And I'm not even saying like in a way, again, imperfect. I'm a very imperfect vehicle to say this, but I'm not a hypocrite. So any position that people take, I do think should be sort of founded or rooted in their actual lived practice. Like their praxis is everything. That's why I'm a big believer in that, because I think that if I'm to say like I'm fully okay with being more conservative and even calling myself that, because I totally understand that I don't mean it necessarily in the same way. I'm okay to be my own person, but I'm also okay to use the label. But if I'm going to make a judgment on something, I cannot be doing that thing. I understand that fundamentally. That's would be very contraindicatory to sort of practices of rectification, sort of speaking bullshit in the world. So I'm very careful in general with how I present my ideas and things, because I don't want people to take of them and be like, this is black magic. I don't want people to take of them in like a do as thou will. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying be flexible in your mind. So I think that it is hypocritical and I have a big problem with it. But I, again, know a lot of Christians who are very interested in metaphysics, who are very skilled in metaphysics. And I think it's also hypocritical that I'm not saying you have to tell people, because I know from my personal life that you cannot really always. There is it's context dependent,
Yeah.
but I also think it's hypocritical to totally issue it. And I think it's a Kabbalistic act. I'll go on the record in saying this. It's actually a magical act to call something evil and satanic without actually, whether you know or not. But if you know something is not evil, this is something I've learned with other podcasters, and I won't even get into specifics. But if a podcaster calls something satanic or evil or tries to label it as part of a cult or something, you have to ask yourself why. You really do, because that's a magical act to it's called the accusation. The accusation only works is if it's something that you yourself have done. So if someone's going to call someone satanic, for me as a metaphysician, I'm going to think that person's satanic. And what do I mean by that? That person takes an idea and they invert it 100%. That doesn't necessarily mean to do something evil per se, but even calling something satanic when you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So to bring it up, Temple of Set. I'm not I'm not a member of the Temple of Set, but I'm interested in their material. I've met several people in it. I'm friends with other people in it. I don't have a problem with it. It's not for me. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe in 20 years, maybe they'll be like begging me. I doubt it. But, but I'm just saying that for me, it's not it. I'm Dharma strictly. So, I have to follow the way I follow, but I try not to look at things too, it's always relative for me. But I do have, again, people do tend to take that in a very Manichaean sort of way where everything must be good or evil or placed in these very narrow confines. And people will be like, no, morality is very black and white. Yes, I agree. Morality is very black and white, but perception is not black and white. Perception is, in fact, completely gray. There's very little binary there.
Yeah.
So be very careful with maybe how you label things unless you fully understand their nature. So I found this with a lot of American Protestants as well, is that they will immediately say Catholicism is like the Babylon religion and the I don't know, the Church of Revelation. Maybe what does that really mean? Revelation is apocalypse, meaning that the wheel is turning. That's what John of Patmos is talking about. The wheel is just turning. We don't have to freak out. We don't have to be millenarian. The devil's not going to arise. How do I know that? Because it's stated very specifically. The foundations of the world are stable. We abide by Mount Zion. It's very clear in Kabbalah and in the Bible itself, in the very literal way. So it's all in our perception, basically, like what Alex said. So what story do you believe in? Do you believe that the world's going to end? I don't believe the world's going to end. I believe in I'm kind of mankind. People want to call it like sincerity paused or sincerity pill. That's fine. But that's where I'm at. I believe in like the potential of mankind to actually do something better. I'm not, I don't want to be a doomer. I don't want to, but I'm not utopian either. I'm not like, oh, like we're going to fix it all in like a, 5-year span and everything's going to be, this perfect place. But I think that we have the opportunities to do it if we will.
Mm-hmm. You definitely just got to see the kind of the good, within people, hopefully. Yeah. One
Remember,
thing,
people are flawed. Sorry, I
yeah.
know. Sorry, Alex.
Oh no,
But
yeah,
yeah,
no, you're
just remember
100%.
people are flawed.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, yeah, that's the one thing people forget, man, is like we're all human, dude. We're gonna fuck up. I don't know. You don't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. I feel like there's just such a pressure on that these days. So I'm interested in like what you think of the whole East versus West view on magic and how potentially the Vatican has shaped the viewpoint in the West.
So I look at the Bible as just strictly a metaphysical story. So you could say maybe the Old Testament. I know this is going to piss people off, and maybe that's why I'm saying it. But anyways, apologize, Alex, in advance. But
Totally fine.
I think the Old Testament could be comparable. I'm not saying it is exactly the same or the characters are exactly the same, but I think it is actually comparable to the Rig Vedic story. I
Oh,
do.
cool. Right on.
And I think the god is similar to Rudra, the angry storm god of a mountain. Obviously, God is described as an angry storm god and a god of a mountain. So I think there's at least a archetypal parallel, if
Yeah.
not a metaphysical parallel. And I think that it's a story about his transformation in consciousness. He starts as an angry storm god, but he becomes a god of love. And in fact, he becomes a son of man rather than a son strictly of God. So I think it's a story also of rectification. And I think this is something that I like about Christianity is that it offers a kind of Western rectification. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it was embodied perfectly in the world.
Mhm.
I have many theological and also historical disputes with many different kinds of Christians. Number one, Calvinists. I think the literalist turn, which is not a common or acceptable way to really read the Bible, this kind of literal interpretation of one to one, this must be real. That's actually a much more recent idea from really the 17th century, maybe the 16th century. And I'm not being like a Catholic where I'm saying all the Protestants are bad. Of course,
Mhm.
that is what Catholics really do think. So it is funny in that way because Americans are more Protestant than Catholic, but Canadians, well, they used to be more Catholic than Protestant or more Catholic than anything else, but now
Mhm.
the demographics have clearly changed a lot. So, but I think that it's a progressive story and it's a story of redemption, and I think it's a story of also God's redemption and what is God really God in the deepest sort of Jewish mythologies or Jewish mysticism. I'm talking about the good, like whatever. I'm just talking about like the profound kind. We'll just say that.
Mhm.
Um, they're talking about God as a kind of that pristine state of consciousness. It kind of exists within us, but it's not really there if we try for it. It's kind of there. I'll answer it like this, Alex. The great sage Ramak said he went to this place, which is very interesting, which is called Lake Baikal, which is in southern Ukraine and part of Russia.
Mhm.
Obviously it's all part of Russia, but right contemporary in contemporary times it's part of Ukraine and this other republic called the Buryasha Republic. So it's very interesting because there are Buddhists that live on the island. There are in the middle of this great lake. There are Kabbalists historically. There are Russian Orthodox. There are shamans, meaning like Tengriist, like I'm talking about real shamans, not like Peru, whatever kind
Mhm.
of shamans, but like real shamans from Siberia. So they would all study at these hermitages on this specific lake, and this lake is very special because it's actually self-illuminating from below at night. So the metaphor to God, for God, Ramek cut a block of ice. He had a young, I guess, a young, like a Siberian guy cut it for him, and he held it up to the sky. And he said, "Look at the clarity of the ice with the light passing through." And he said, "What happens when you melt the ice?" Well, it's also clear. So the clarity of the ice appearing as turquoise or appearing as green, because it can appear as both. That is really just sort of an illusory way to understand the nature of God, which is
Mhm.
qualityless, pristine, likened to lightning, but non phenomenological, meaning that God isn't found in the world, but he can be perceived in the world.
Mhm.
Then he likened the day sky to the night sky. And he said, look at the water. Did the water actually change color, or does it just look dark blue? Because when you cut a block of ice, it's still clear. When you melt a block of ice, it's still clear. So isn't the true nature of the God then sort of this non-abiding, pristine clarity? So I would say that that's probably closer to true than not true. And so I mean, that's kind of what I think is like the nature of reality is like we are always looking for something else, but maybe also it's always in us too, but we're so mired in our own bullshit that we forget. And that's okay. And
Mhm.
again, to go back to your point, like I've made so many fuck ups, Alex, in my sort of podcast career, as well as being like a co host with the seven other guys, because I'm an imperfect person, but I also knew enough to bring it together to sort of soften my harshness and also to even out my weak points, like where I don't know about the Norse stuff. So I have like Solar talks about that. I
Mhm.
don't know about astrology. So we have Matt talk about that. I don't, I'm not a culture guy. So we have Joseph talk about that. I'm not a markets or financial guy. So we have Mike talk about that. I'm
Mhm.
not a Greek Orthodox or Old Testament enjoyer, and he knows the Old Testament really well. So we have Joshua talk about it. So and we also have the manga, anime, and weeb guy in Monty. So I just want to make sure I say them all. I don't want to skip anyone, but I'm just saying I've learned to fill in where I'm weak and actually be okay with that and actually learn from them. And yes, I think I'm smart and all that. And probably sometimes that is probably me being like egoic and thinking I can do everything. But I've actually learned, and maybe it's a humbling experience as well. And it's definitely been humbling is that I actually can't do everything. And I'm actually much stronger in the whole because I'm really, again, a lone wolf. Like, I don't even know if I like that metaphor. I don't really like that metaphor. I'm sorry I use it. It's a cliche. I try and
One
avoid
man
those.
wolf pack. I'm fine.
Definitely, but I'm not.
Yeah.
That's what I really realized is like actually a magician is better with his circle or better in a group. But then you can see historically, like with Crowley, not just with him, but with all of them, the ego gets out of control. And then the whole magical project gets out of control.
Hmm.
So you have to really temper it. And people think that I'm, saying this is comparing myself. I'm not. I'm saying that this is the story of all magical societies, basically, is that you have all of these disparate people, all lone wolves in their own right,
Hmm.
who have to then come together because they realize actually our relationships with each other is more important, maybe even than our own personal projects to a degree.
Hmm.
So, and then you have to reconcile all the different relationships. And it's not because I don't like all of them. I actually personally like all of them to a great degree, but it's the problem is you have to interact with all of them
Yeah.
all the time. And sometimes that's not easy because it's like I mean I have other siblings, but I'm the eldest, so I have probably that eldest child syndrome where I think I'm above it. I'm just, you know,
Yeah.
but you can't. You have to treat people like how you. I know it sounds really cliche and Christian, but you kind of have to treat people like how you want to be treated and respected.
Yeah. No, yeah, I completely agree. Because at the end of the day, everybody, they're kind of coming from their own belief system, usually based off of the way that they're like raised and what they were taught kind of growing up. Some people are forced into it, like in a way, and it's just hard to let go of as you get older, because it becomes, I guess, deeply rooted within you as time goes on. But you said that you're super interested in like the feminine deities. One I've kind of like saw pop up a bunch of Sophia. Do you know much about that? I'm sure you do.
I do know I don't want to talk your ear off about this one subject. I would love to. We can definitely have another conversation where
Oh
we
yeah,
discuss
yeah,
this, even on my show. I'd love to have you on. But
yeah.
Sophia, yeah, I mean, I think that's what the daughter essentially is. It's the mother. She's lived out. So in the Indian, so to bring back your point about Hinduism and sort of the nexus point of all of that and where the texts begin and end, Hinduism is really innovative because it actually tells her story very similarly to the Gnostic Sophia texts. Very similarly.
Interesting. Cool. Mm.
She is a queen of heaven, daughter, you could say, of the husk of God. This is very interesting. The Godhead is named Brahma. He's not the Godhead, excuse me. He's the husk of God, specifically. It's called the husk of God. His name is Brahma. Sometimes he can even have a goat's head, but that's a different story.
Mm.
But interesting. But so he has a big yajna, Vedic yajna in heaven, and he invites all the deities, but he doesn't invite Shiva. Why is this important? Shiva is actually God in the story. I'm not saying you have to believe it, but I'm saying in the
Yeah.
story, that's the meaning
Hmm.
is Shiva is God. So the husk of God, maybe Shiva at a lower state of consciousness or a piece of Shiva, maybe his fingernail or something, says that he's not even allowed at the great celebration of heaven. This is also a problem because he's married to the princess of heaven. So she's invited to the yajna and he's not. So she basically throws herself into this fire and then it becomes a cremation fire. So after some events, she gets cut up into 51 pieces. I know it's very gruesome, but those pieces fall on earth and then they become temples, what they're called Shakti Peets, like places of divine feminine worship, energy, potency. So basically, it offers the story of the falling goddess, but then Tantra comes in and says, actually, she might not know who she was, but she has an opportunity to sort of gather herself, gather all her pieces, her corpus back together, and really maybe explore through consciousness who she really is. So this is a big part of Tantra is the idea of names. What is her name? What is her true name? What is her primordial name? And so there are different, obviously, opinions of what happens to her. But I think the Buddhist resolution is the best, is that she becomes green Tara. She becomes sort of the ineffable goddess above ineffable goddesses, the goddesses who transcends all goddesses. She's tantric, meaning left-hand path in some ways, but she's also a shramanic goddess, meaning that she can be prayed to by people at the monastery. She's not worldly, meaning that she's non-phenomenological, meaning that she actually doesn't take shape in the world in quite the ways that we understand. It's much more subtle than that.
Mhm.
So it basically offers her this rectification from Queen of Heaven to Queen of Hell and then back up again. In some ways, you could say that she begins at Kether, at the top of the tree, falls down, but then is able to rectify herself and climb back up. So, isn't that the story of Sophia? Her falling into the material creation, falling into Pleroma, forgetting her name, becoming the many. Because what is Sophia? Sophia is really wisdom, which is also interesting because that is also what Vidya means in Sanskrit. Vidya, obviously, I said this right at the beginning. I did a series on Mahavidya, the greater wisdoms compared to the tree. This is also interesting because the Sephira, the spheres, as people call them, are empty in quality, negative space, meaning they can too be described as feminine receptacles. So I think that this whole story of Sophia is actually the true story. If you really want my weird opinion, is that I think
Yeah.
that she has to arise in the world in specific ways to teach us specific things, and we can take ideas that we interpret, because I don't think it's perfect. Like, the way she manifests and then the ways that we understand it is imperfect. So we can't get too fixated on these ideas. And a lot of people have, again, a predisposition to fixate on her in specific forms, very left-handed path forms. And I think that that's not really who she is. If you want to really talk about like Gnostic texts like Diamond Thunder Mind or Thunder Perfect Mind, there's a tantric text that's extremely similar to this. Like, almost, it's written even in the same way. It's saying, I am not. I am not.
Mhm.
But there's a secret way to understand this, actually. It's to cut through the bullshit, I like to say.
Yeah.
It's not about either or, it's about neither nor. Meaning she's always the secret third thing. She's not neither of the two things. She's not within the polarities. She's beyond them. Post-conceptual. That's how we describe the feminine divine force, if you want to call it that, in Buddhism. She's post-conceptual, meaning that no label we can attribute to her is really correct. So in the Gnostic text that I just referenced, she calls herself a whore. She says, I'm a virgin, I'm a whore. She's neither of those things, maybe. Because maybe those things aren't really, they're just conceptual ideas, right? They're archetypes
Yeah.
to live out. But what if she's lived out this sort of Leela, this divine cycle for many, many millennia? And it's really all about how we understand it and how we put the story together. And if we say that she exists at low consciousness, part of the reason I'm against saying that is then she does manifest like that. Just like the early Kabbalists and the Zoroastrians believe that the ways that we think of God, perceive God in the world, is also the way God manifests in the world. So if you believe God is an angry storm god that's going to strike you with lightning for speaking certain things or saying, doing certain acts, that is actually a very Kabbalistic idea that God will be like that. But if we believe God is love, we believe God is something else, then that's how it's going to be. I'm not saying that fundamentally his nature is predicated on us, but I do think it's predicated on our perception.
Yeah. Super interesting. Well, I won't take up too much more of your time, man. I really, really appreciate you doing this. I always ask my guests at the end of the show what they think happens when we die. So I'll go ahead
So,
and ask you. You might have already answered it like 1,000 times through this podcast, but what do you think happens to you when we die?
well, let me first say thank you so much, Alex,
Hmm.
for letting me come on, for being pushy and letting me come on. I do appreciate it.
You're welcome anytime, man. Yeah.
And I think you're doing a really, I know I didn't say this right at the beginning, I should have. I think you're doing a really cool project. I'm really impressed with it.
Thank
And
you.
And I think that everyone you've had on is really strong and solid. And I think that you're actually doing something parallel, not similar, but parallel to me, where you're interviewing people who actually have very expansive ideas of the reality and the world. I don't have to agree with all of them, but I actually agree that they're pushing boundaries in the way that they're thinking of the world. So I'm really into that. So kudos to you. Number
Thank
one,
you.
you're welcome. I should have said that at the front, but it's
That's
okay.
okay.
Okay, you can take it
Totally.
anyway.
Yeah.
So what happens when we die? So again, true dharma. So I do believe that we go into what's called the bardo for 49 days. What does that mean? Uh, for me, I'll explain it in the way that I understand it. Okay,
Hmm.
so this might not be the exact way that everyone thinks of it, but I think we go into a smoky place, a place of decoherence, a place of flux. I think we um, can choose different outcomes. I think we choose the cycle of samsara we want to live out. That's a very Buddhist idea. You go to hell if you want. You go to hell if you haven't reconciled your ideas of yourself, your dualism. You know, if you've
Hmm.
done all these degrading things in the world, then like is it's going to be really hard to let those things go,
Yeah.
right? And are you fixed in your identity? Are you fixed in who you were? Or maybe you're more flexible. So then maybe you have a more, maybe you're more liminal. So maybe you're more easily able to pass through into the next life. But basically, Tibetans believe you spend 49 days. This is a conceptual and slash magic number. This isn't necessarily real.
Hmm.
People tend to take it very literally. And yes, it can be. It can be a sign of what's called a sign and a symbol of someone's reincarnation. They only come back after 40 or rebirth. It's not really reincarnation, but I'm using a more common like word for it. But
Hmm.
technically it is rebirth. So let me just say that. But I think we travel through these worlds, different conceptual NDEs are basically magical experiences, just a little slightly different. But they're very similar. Very, very similar. And I think that we sort of have to reconcile different outcomes that we can choose, again, based on our consciousness and our sort of state of consciousness at the time of death. And then I think we will come back into another samsaric form. Samsaric's not necessarily evil, it just means that we're entering back into the what's often likened to the ocean of rebirth. Usually we Tibetans especially, this is also Buddhist, but Tibetans will always say we come back as a fish usually. Why is this? Because fish live out thousands and thousands of lifetimes in a very short cycle. They can live out, I don't know, you can, fish could easily, like different generations of fish, you could have multiple lives and rebirths burning off all the negative karma very quickly, right?
Hmm.
Very, very quickly. But they might be hundreds, maybe thousands of lifetimes you spend as a fish. But that actually might only be like the span of a year. So who knows really is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I'm saying there's all these kinds of ideas that I do think that you come into some other form, whether that's material human, maybe you go into the ghost worlds. That's another idea. Is
Hmm.
that you can arise on the carnal ground as a Bhuta, a Preta, or a Vitali, like a ferocious sort of demon, I guess you could say, on the carnal ground, very literal carnal ground, but also in our minds, also in the conceptual space of reality. So I think there are multiple outcomes, and I think people are a lot more in control of it. And I think that scares a lot of people too, because it's like, again, it's putting yourself into you are the agent. You are the agent of your own outcome. So I would like to think that through doing practices, now you don't have to be a Buddhist, but maybe just third G in general, you actually can work away some of that karma just from this life, but maybe also from the past lives if you're lucky. And you can actually speed up and maybe even begin to choose your outcomes, maybe even
Yeah.
choose to go into the higher worlds. So I do think that that is all possible. Now, do I think it's really difficult? Yes, but I think it's possible.
Hmm.
So I think that nothing is the end. I don't think death is the end. I don't think the bodily death is the end, and I don't think the sort of the for well, in Chinese it's described as you eat the magical soup. This old lady, this grandmother kind of figure, she offers you a very barbell. She stands on what's called the Naihe bridge, so it's a bridge between the living and the dead, and she offers you this bowl of soup, and you drink the soup, and you forget your old life, 100%, all the people that you ever knew. You forget who you were, your name, your most important thing. But in Buddhism, we say that even if you forget, you still have all these karmic connections. If you've loved someone, if you've hooked up with someone, if you've spoken to someone in passing at the grocery store, no matter how small, you have made karmic connections with people. And so in your next life, whether you recognize it or not, you will have those people, same people, but they're not the same because they have a different name, just like Sophia. I don't know. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
crazy, but I think that's a cool way to sort of bring it in.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it and would love to do it again.
I would come on anytime. You'll have a hard time getting rid of me, Alex. But so I'm always up for an invite. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really do. And thank you to Nick for suggesting me and obviously having me as part of the Rejects for 2 years. It's been a
Yeah,
big
shout
part
out
of
Nick.
my
Yeah,
yeah, 100%. Because he's been a big influence on me as well. Like I said, Robbie and all of that. But like Nick is a pioneer in a way because he talked about the doing Kabbalah in this very similar way that I talk about it now. Not quite. It's not like I take from him, but hearing him speak of it as a kind of dynamic, moving system really influenced me as well. So I would not be the same podcaster specifically without Nick. And this isn't me being his sidekick or anything because, we're like, but I do owe him in the sense of the mentorship of sort of magical ideas. He is kind of an OG. He is kind of like the guy right now.
yeah, man. You
So,
all of you guys are just incredible people to talk to. I mean, super fascinating. Like, all have your own little expertise too, man. It's definitely special what you
so
guys got going on.
he's really smart. Nick is, I'm sure he'll love this. He's really smart because he followed that model of bringing people to fill spaces where his own expertise was not sufficient. So he was recognizing in himself, it's not a deficiency. It's just saying my knowledge is not enough to cover X, Y, and Z. But he's clearly sufficient enough in both magical and sort of magical history knowledge to cover a wide range of topics by himself and with Lisa. So he's capable, but he feels like it's better on a show and more interesting. And I actually agree with him doing a group project myself. People find it much more dynamic to hear you in synthesis speak with other people who are different. And sometimes you even disagree, or sometimes you bring new understanding. Okay, I'll give a perfect example to close the show. No, you don't have to cut the recording, but I say I'll give a concise example.
Yeah.
We were talking about the quality of the heatless flame, which is something that I've discussed in terms of Aeon of the Daughter, but it's also an alchemical idea, a very important one of the most important alchemical ideas, really. How to temper that heat that arises in synthesis, because synthesis produces a lot of heat.
Mhm.
So if you want to relate this to alchemy, it's like making the philosopher's stone, the red. If you want to say red, there's obviously different color theories on which color comes last, but usually it's the red philosopher's stone. So how do you deal with the production of heat? Well, there's an idea that the sort of two colors specifically arise in synthesis is green and pink. So what does this have to do with anything? We were talking about this. Nick goes, oh, a flame is heatless when you're far away from it, when you're perceiving it. And I was like, okay. I just kind of like, I didn't dismiss it, obviously, but I kind of said, okay. And then we moved on. I left the show. I was like thinking about it. I was gardening or something. And I was like, actually, that's really fucking profound because that's sort of how Tantra explains it, because we always describe as like the flame is heatless from afar. But I never actually thought about it as actually you have to be in distance, like physical distance. And the heat actually is heatless. The flame is heatless. So that's what the strength of the show is that I can go and say, okay, I understand this in a tantric way. And it might not even be the same recording, the same day, the same moment, but you kind of take on all of this knowledge,
Mhm.
really. Even if I don't agree with the guest, and I'm one of the more vocal people in terms of if I don't agree, you'll probably know that I don't agree. Either I say nothing or I say I don't agree.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great show. I'm really lucky to be a part of it. I'm lucky to know all the other rejects, of which there are 12 or 13. You know, Nick is a magician, so you're never quite sure, but there are 12 or 13 of us. 13 being the more magical number, of course, but maybe 13 is him himself. I don't know. But yeah, he's been a great mentor, and he's also had many of the Grey Lodge people on his show, Solar Exile, Joshua the Branch, and Matt Murrah, and he's like been really supportive as like someone who's like a big creator to kind of boost us and help me personally on my show, Threshold Saints, and do all the projects. I think that a lot of things have arisen from people in his circle, and so that's pretty rare for a podcaster.
I mean, he's put together a pretty damn badass show. So props to seriously all of you guys. Shout out, Colt Rejects and Nick. And again, Jin the Ninja. Really appreciate your time. Go check out Threshold Saints. And
Yes,
yeah, let's
thank
do
you.
this again, man.